Hey, everybody. So if you have been hanging out with us for the last couple seasons of the podcast, you probably remember us mentioning Flaututi in our past episodes. Our friend Molly Sharp, who incidentally was also a guest in season 1, started Flaututi to share her awesome duet arrangements of standard viola rep, which are great for teaching, and it has now grown into a wide-ranging catalog of one-of-a-kind resources for violists and beyond. Steph, do you remember when we played one of the duets from a holiday bundle together?
Yes, it's one of my most cherished holiday memories.
Aww.
But actually, one of my favorites is something that all string instrumentalists would love. It's called Making Double Stops Ring, a guided exploration of just intonation. And Molly actually shared the viola version with us last year, and I am not exaggerating when I say that it completely changed the way I think about intonation. No one has ever explained it to me like this before. I think that we all realize on some level that a B in all situations is not the same, but why?
Yeah. Have you ever had that classic argument in a string quartet setting when you're trying to tune a chord and maybe we're playing that B and we're being told, no, it needs to go lower. No, it needs to go higher. It needs to go here. Wouldn't it be amazing to save all those hours for our string quartet students with no debate? We just know where it's supposed to go. Everyone agrees because there's only one way.
Right. You can just gift them copies of this book.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing personal. Just here's a book about intonation. Well, Molly has made it easy for all of us to play in tune. So whether you play viola, violin, cello, or bass, there's a version for you. You can find this pragmatic book, viola duet arrangements of classic viola repertoire, and so much more at vlatutti.com under Marketplace, or look in this episode's show notes. Did you hear that William Shatner went to space today?
Stop it.
It's true. Captain Kirk actually went to space. He is 90 years old.
Oh.
And he just went on Jeff Bezos's, what's it called? Oh, Blue Origin company.
Oh my God, that's so crazy. I know we're both Trekkies, so this is a very exciting thing.
Well, I'm a Trekkie by marriage. Let's be clear.
I'm a Trekkie by birth.
Okay. So Jeff Bezos has this Blue Origin company that he just launched into space. Civilian passenger space travel.
Does it say how much it costs?
No, it does not say.
I want to start a GoFundMe to send Viola-Centric into space.
I don't know if I really want to go.
You wouldn't do it?
Well, okay. It seems like such a lot of effort to go for like a 10-minute jaunt into the atmosphere and then come straight back. No.
That's amazing.
William Shatner, he's 90.
If I had the opportunity to go to space, nah.
No, but I don't think of that as going to space.
Do you get to see the Earth from out there?
The way he describes it is you get shot up like this very traumatic birth into space, and then the blue atmosphere shifts to black. You realize that you're there, and then back down you come.
Oh, so you don't even get to like float around and see the view or anything like that? Okay.
Nope.
Yeah, this makes this okay. I will also say I'm really not good with heights. Like I'm actually very scared of heights.
What are you talking about? Send Viola-Centric to space. Oh, by the way, I don't like heights.
Okay, so the thing is, I've done a lot of work to like conquer this like really terrible fear I have. I used to be terrified of the Bay Bridge in Annapolis. Anybody who lives in the DMV knows.
I'm terrified. I'm not scared of heights, but there were like no rails on that.
Yeah. No.
Oh my God.
I forget it. Flying, terrible. Was always terrified of flying. And I have since, like, takeoff is still a little hard, but anyway, so I think the reason that this seems so appealing right now is because it's so unlikely that it's going to happen for a long, long time. Because here I am talking about, yeah, let's go to space. I'm like,
you talking a big game.
If I actually had to go to space, I'd be like, Steph, are you sure? Remember how you said it was like a really long trip for a whole lot of nothing? I would only want to go up there, though, if I could like be and just like see the Earth float around for a little while. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, yeah.
Waste of money.
Welcome to the Viola-centric podcast. We are two curious violists creating a safe place to have authentic and challenging conversations in the professional music world. I'm Liz.
And I'm Steph. Let's jump in the deep end.
Did you guys do anything fun for the holiday weekend since it was Indigenous Peoples Day on Monday?
No, it was just like the usual, get the kids to this, get the kids to that. It's really strange to hear people who are so opposed to it being Indigenous Peoples Day.
I know.
I'm like, are you serious right now?
Yes, they are.
I know.
It's hard. I think it's safe to say we're not really interested in being political on our podcast, but at the same time, what is the problem with recognizing them? What is the problem? Why is that a problem? You don't mess with Christopher Columbus. He sailed the ocean blue and he discovered this land, which he didn't because there were people already living here. Like there was no discovery made, and he didn't even know he was in the right. He didn't even know where he was. He thought he was in India. He was confused. He was very confused.
He was very confused. And that dude was like, he was a savage himself.
Oh, God.
Even the Spanish royalty were like, this guy is crazy. Get him out of here.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's hysterical.
The Spanish Inquisition were like, this guy has taken it a step too far.
They were like, listen, Chris, here's the deal. It's gotten a little crazy. I think you need to go get on a boat and just sail somewhere else for a while.
You know what? Try and find India.
Yeah, go find India.
This is a guy who is so good at his job that he went to the entirely wrong continent and he gets a day out of it.
Yeah. Why? It's insane.
Oh my God.
It's so crazy.
Hot takes.
Hot takes.
It's a real discomfort that people have with change.
Yeah.
And with the perceived loss of power, I think.
Yeah. Well, I would go so far as to say it's not perceived. I attended this really brilliant webinar that my friend Janet Copenhaver, she's the president of Embracing Arlington Arts, which is a nonprofit here in Arlington County. She put together what she called a diversity chat with a man named Michael Bobbitt, who used to work down here in DC in the arts scene. Now he's in Massachusetts and works on the policy making side. So he actually distributes funds from the government there in Massachusetts to arts organizations. It was a conversation around how do we move forward as leaders in the arts and as members of the arts community with diversity and inclusion. And this is a really difficult conversation to have in the world of classical music, but it's so important. And he just had such beautiful ways of describing this seemingly lofty concept of systemic racism. And actually for him, it's a terminology thing. Every person who benefits from a racist system is racist. So it's not like we're pointing a finger at someone and saying, well, you're a racist and I'm not, which is what we would have done in the past. We're now acknowledging that no matter how progressive you may consider yourself to be, if you are of Caucasian descent in this country, you are benefiting from the racist system, and therefore your power has come from that system and you're inherently racist. Like there's nothing we can do about that unless the system itself changes, which seems to make a lot of sense. There is that resistance to this idea. Now, people can be prejudiced in all sorts of ways, and that is not exclusive to white people. So I think it's important too to acknowledge, like, it's not that everyone is all of a sudden saying that white people are the only people who have prejudices and that there's this attack on us. It's just saying that from the inception of our country, it has been about oppressing people of other races in order for white people to get ahead. Mm-hmm. I don't know how anyone can deny that. That is just fact. It's just a fact. But I also thought it was really helpful for me to hear that it just doesn't have to be so contentious. But the problem, the fear that people have, it's rooted in some reality, which is in order for us to make room for everyone at the table, we have to be willing to give up a little bit. whatever that might look like. It might look like a bit of money. It might look like a bit of power, probably a combination of the two. Privilege in the way that you are able to move about in your lives that other people in this country can't. This just seems to me like how to be a good person. Once you know, how do you turn around and say, nope, this is not the reality? All these people are lying. That was something that stuck with me too, that this guy said. When a BIPOC person tells you their experience, believe them. Mm-hmm. Why is the instinct to say, oh, you're exaggerating, or it's not really like that, or I haven't seen that in my own life, so it must not be true? Mm-hmm. What is that?
It's gaslighting.
Right. And I don't want to make this a political thing, but I think you and I are both fairly comfortable saying that we are on the side of being progressive. And that just means like being uncomfortable for a while. And I understand that the president of the United States is trying to walk a line. So he basically named the holiday both days. Like it's Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. Maybe that's what we need right now until we can get to the point where people won't write articles about how important Columbus was and how it needs to stay. Maybe just 1 inch at a time. If you find yourself in a position of influence, whether that's teaching or being in politics or being a leader in an organization, whatever that might be, just coming from a place of there should ideally be a seat at the table for everybody. And if there isn't, then it's an introspective journey to take about why that is and why you feel that way.
And I think being prepared to be uncomfortable is a good way to go into those situations because you can't know everything. You don't know what you think you know. I just heard someone say that if you're not uncomfortable in doing whatever it is that you say that you're doing, you're being performative.
I like that.
Because you're not really giving up anything meaningful.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable.
And a little scary, right?
Because it's unknown, you know?
Yeah, exactly. We talk about fear in the microcosm of our careers, but that's really what we're talking about on a grand scale is fear of the change, fear of what will happen to your life as you know it. There's a lot of fear, and when that compounds, it gets ugly. It just gets ugly.
Is. And it's long work, and we're not going to do it overnight.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can all grow into this big work that we all have ahead of us.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk with Doug today, who's involved in the union here. And we were talking about union and solidarity and all that. There's a strike on the horizon in the film industry right now. They have about 5 days as of when we're recording this to get everything negotiated. And they're just asking for fair wages and fair working conditions. Everything for the pandemic was put on hold. A lot of those folks were out of work. And now that things are back, studios are trying to catch up all of the production that they missed over the pandemic. And the people who are suffering are those low-paid union workers out there who are doing makeup. They're setting stages. They're gathering props. They're doing all those jobs that are so vital to that industry. And those folks are working overtime with very little pay, very little break, very little rest. And they're just trying to get what they're owed.
Yeah. I think it's been really interesting, too, to see on a grander scale in our country, people leaving their jobs left and right. I think there are a variety of reasons for that. But at the end of the day, like working conditions for the average American in this country are not good. And for better or worse, the pandemic created this environment for people to start to see what was working and what wasn't. And people seem a little less likely to put up with things. When it comes to this conversation with Doug, actually, there's something that I've been thinking about ever since last week. It's stuck with me. Stephanie and I played this really fun gig last week. And the first day, as often happens these days, we end up getting into some pretty deep conversations with our colleagues about all things music business related in the freelancing world. And we were sitting around a table and we were kind of talking about this theme that you all are familiar with now, which is figuring out the value of the yeses that you consider and the no's that you consider in your work, going beyond just the filling of the schedule or the paycheck. And this part of the conversation has stuck with me because for me, it gave me a check to realize that the way I sometimes convey this message, I think can be misconstrued. And what I'm talking about is, Stephanie, you might remember, one of our colleagues kind of pitched back up and they said, do you feel like you're more easily able to say no to work because you now are coming from a position of privilege that allows you to afford to be able to say no to that work? I essentially said, well, I will definitely say that I feel more solidified in my freelance career here than I did a decade ago. But do I feel confident that I'm just going to get the work all the time? No. That feeling of maybe it won't be your job always, that never goes away. We all have kind of to wrestle with that. So I'm not comfortable 100% of the time, I would say. But I think that there are two things. I think that I have started to really embrace the idea that it's not just about that paycheck. There are more costs associated with work, like my time, like being with my loved ones, my body, staying healthy. And it's hard to remember those things, especially when we get into the start of this when we're hustling, which I'll let you talk about a little more detail. But the other piece that I remembered, which I thought was really important to remember, and I just wanted to share it in our forum here, reminded me of when we talked with Jennifer Wade about this last season, that at any point, if you don't feel good about saying no, then don't say no. And if it feels good to have a lot of things going on, if you want to pack your schedule, if you enjoy that, if you thrive doing that, no one is saying don't do it. It's all about what feels comfortable for the individual. I think there's just a level of anxiety that I have lived with in this career for a long time. And for me, it really has been so helpful to look back through this lens of, okay, I teach, I do this, I do that. Like this job that's going to pay me $150 to drive 2 hours out of the way and then back, is it really something that I want to say yes to? And if the answer is no, like giving myself permission almost to say no rather than the opposite, if that makes sense. I thought I should clarify that because I do think sometimes it may come off like we are speaking from a place of privilege because of where we are in our careers in this moment. But I don't think you have to wait 15 years to get to this point. If we could save someone from that little thread of anxiety that we had for so long. And Stephanie, your response was great too.
I think there's a time and place for all that. All the hustle that we do early in our career, that's that phase of your career. We all hear about people who are in different phases of, say, law work. That phase of your first year of paralegal or whatever, and you work insane hours. Mm-hmm. And then you work your way up through the law firm and you're able to delegate a little bit more work. So maybe now you're an actual lawyer and you delegate some of that stuff to the paralegals, and then you move up even further and now you're a partner. So you delegate more to people who are still working their way up the ladder and the paralegals. And I don't think our career is unlike that. I honestly feel like there's a time and place in your career where hustle makes sense.
Yeah.
Where you are trying to gain experience. You're trying to keep your schedule full because you have to make money. I think where the challenge happens is transitioning and knowing when that phase is done.
I love that.
Right?
It's really well put. And even if you're settled, even if you're consistently getting work, mentally, internally, to continue to feel that need for excessive hustle. And as we get older, we just get more tired. Like it's harder to do that, right?
Yeah.
I think that's such a great analogy. It's perfect, really. Even if you're in hustling stage, if you're 24 years old and you're just getting out of grad school and you're hitting the pavement, which I have no problem with. I thrived with that early on. It's that internal place of knowing who you are, knowing your identity, knowing what you want out of your career, really doing that work to build your brand, as they say, and allowing that to dictate the choices you make rather than just, there's this empty spot on my calendar. Sometimes you won't know a thing about the gig and you want to take a shot and you want to go out and do it. Yeah, go out and do it. That's good. It's good experience. You never know who you're going to meet. Mm-hmm. We've given that advice before. I 100% believe in relationship building, and that can happen on seemingly the least enticing gig that you play, as well as the most amazing gig that you get offered in a season. But it's a shift internally. And I do want to recognize, I know that sometimes that conversation can feel like we can't relate. And I think this really blends nicely into this invigorating conversation we have with Doug about what it means to be a member of a musicians union, what the union represents, and this perception that the union work is not for everybody. And even for us to talk about working jobs that have union CBAs, collective bargaining agreements. can seem like coming from a place of privilege. I really want to acknowledge that. I don't know what you think about this stuff, but I think the conversation poses a lot of thoughts and possible ideas for how we might be able to get everybody in this mindset that the union can be this living, breathing thing that grows and that there's more opportunity for people to be involved.
Well, yeah, I enjoyed talking with Doug because he brought a different perspective to our conversation and to the way that I view the union. And I honestly can say that before our conversation, I really thought of the union as this entity.
Yes.
Like a law firm. Let's just take the analogy there.
Yep.
And their job was to manage people. But really, it is more of a collective where we are all part of this. I like how you put it, like an organism. It's a living, breathing organism. And we all should have a part in making that living, breathing thing work. And that was definitely a shift after talking with Doug. So thank you, Doug, for that.
Yeah, totally agree. And I love the way you just put that we all should and could have a part in how it works, because the more support you have from the ground up, I think the stronger it could be. I'm aware too that even talking about the union, it can be a political thing.
We're sticking our neck out here for you guys.
Yes.
For this content, just so you know.
This is a dicey episode.
It is dicey. I feel myself like, whew.
I know.
Making sure I word things correctly.
Yes, we might get some ads.
That's okay. Let's start the conversation, right?
It would be really interesting to hear some feedback about various perspectives. What do you think about this conversation with Doug? And how do you relate? How does it relate to your life as a freelancer? So
enjoy this conversation with Doug Rosenthal. Hi, everyone. As you may know, I recently went through a big change in my setup. I transitioned from using a bar-style shoulder rest to a more minimal one, and at the heart of that change was the desire for a fuller, more resonant sound. I tried many of the affordable options out there, and I even did a side-by-side comparison video, and in the end, I choose to play on an arc rest for the superior sound quality and the freedom of movement that it gives me. Liz and I are grateful to Tigran and Aaron over at ArcRest for their support for season 2, and we couldn't be happier to talk about ArcRest because the truth is that we use it and we love it too. Find out more information in the show notes and at thearcrest.com. That's TheArcrest.com. Our guest today is Doug Rosenthal, who's the assistant principal trombone of the Kennedy Center Opera House Orchestra. And Doug is originally from the Chicago, Illinois area. And since winning the job at the Opera House, he's been a guest artist with many major symphonies across the United States. Doug is a teacher. He's an activist in his community. He serves on the executive board for the Washington, D.C. Federation of Musicians Union. And we're just so pleased to have you here with us today to really jump in the deep end with us.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, especially I'm sure everyone is opening with pandemic-related stuff. But after the last 18, 19 months, any personal connection is just like I feel desperate for. So
yes. Yes.
So this feels good.
Well, I was doing some research for your episode, and I was reading a post that you were a guest on someone else's blog where you talked about the process of preparing for your audition here at the Kennedy Center. And the way that you talked about mental preparation really resonated with Liz and I. And I'm going to pull a Liz here and quote you back to you.
Love it.
Love it.
I'm ready.
You were talking about your mental preparation and how you had been seeing a therapist, which we are all about here. Mm-hmm. So you say, by now, weekly sessions in therapy had helped me to put my mind in a much better place. I had a great deal of clarity. Insofar, I was content with my daily work and felt absolutely no pressure to win or even advance at these upcoming auditions. One day, I had a light bulb moment, something that would eventually become a mantra. Quote, my happiness as an individual is not dependent upon employment in any of these orchestras, end quote. And that really struck me as a place that I think we all know that that's where we should be before we go into an audition or a high pressure situation, but it's so hard to get there. And I wanted to hear about how you arrived at that spot and what your experience with therapy was like and how it applied to you as a musician.
Sure. mental health is just such an ongoing journey.
Mm-hmm.
That blog post, that was for Toby Off's website. He's the principal trombonist in the Boston Symphony. So that was 2012. And it's so funny because it's not like I won this audition and all of a sudden, I'm cured. I'm good for life. It's very ups and downs. I was in the New World Symphony down in Miami. There was this therapist that a lot of fellows at New World were seeing, and I thought, sure, this sounds like something I'd be interested in pursuing. And it became very apparent that a lot of issues with my performance anxiety, my performance-related hangups, were really just extensions of the overarching human experience, of being me. So now we're in September 2011. I auditioned for the Atlanta Symphony, and the preparation was really good. I had a coach say, I really think you could go in and win this thing. And I didn't make it through more than 4 excerpts of the first round before they said, thank you. So I felt gutted.
Crushed, yeah.
Yeah. This was both a terrible feeling in the short term, but it was a really good thing to take back to this therapist and say, okay, this is what just happened. Whether or not I would have actually won the audition. Someone thought highly of my level of playing, and then all of a sudden I was in the throes of it, and it was not going well. There's no way my trombone playing got worse overnight.
Right.
So we worked on this concept of the critical voice, the inner critic. Psychology professionals use different terms for it. I'll just use inner critic. In fact, a lot of listeners hopefully have heard of Don Green and Noah Kageyama. Mm-hmm. Well, they also use inner critic.
Right. Yeah.
Trombone auditions for full-time orchestras, maybe they're, 7 or 8 a year. If it's more, it's not much more than that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
2 auditions were announced within days of each other, the Utah Symphony and the Kennedy Center Opera House Orchestra, both of them assistant principal trombone. And so it was given the numbers, I can do both. It was about December of 2011. So, it was a few months since I started really working on this stuff with my therapist. I understood intellectually that while I was progressing in certain areas of the trombone, they could be diminished by that voice that tells you, you're going to miss that B flat, or your chops are too tired, you're going to blank out. I don't want to give it too much attention. But these are just examples of the way, at least with brass playing, that the inner critic can manifest itself. Yeah. And so by the time I started preparing for these auditions in December, I can't pinpoint where exactly this idea came, where it was I can still be a happy human and not be in the Utah Symphony. I can still be a happy human and not be in the Kennedy Center Opera House Orchestra. And I even went as far as, okay, so does anyone else, when they're taking an audition, dread that moment when the personnel manager comes out to say who advanced and who's going home?
Yes. Of course.
Oh my God.
Because it's not just a personal shame for how you performed, but it's also in front of other people.
Yes.
Right. Uh-huh. So that for me was something that I always just, that moment was so uncomfortable. So I didn't really mean to do this, but I was sort of envisioning the personnel manager coming out and not calling my number. I know this is so counterintuitive. I know Don Green and Noah Kageyama and a million other psychologists would say, why would you imagine the worst case scenario? But really it was more, I was making peace with that possibility.
Yes.
Not only that, but I started coming up with these lists in my head of reasons moving to either Salt Lake City or Washington, D.C. would have drawbacks. This is so negative.
That's so interesting.
And, I don't want to bash either city, so
come on, we can bash DC a little.
Traffic.
It's frustrating to live here.
Yes.
Yes. I knew about the traffic in DC before I even auditioned here. So I was coming up with all these reasons why it just was not that big of a deal.
It's so huge though, right? Because I think what we do instinctively on the other end of it is romanticize the winning of the job. Romanticize what all these wonderful things that it's going to be, that it can't possibly live up to the expectation. And so it's not like it was negative. You were just kind of being realistic.
Yeah, I was definitely taking that pie out of the sky.
Yes, I love that.
And putting it down into the earth, In that article, I also talked about the ways that I practiced in the practice room. I was going for progress, not perfection.
Yes.
And me being a perfectionist, that was hard at first. But if I started focusing on making one thing better, let's just say the rhythm of this one excerpt, I found that affected the rhythm of everything else I played, because you're not working on the rhythm of bolero. You're working on your internal pulse. Mm-hmm. And you carry that internal pulse into other stuff, hopefully.
Totally.
And it's so funny hearing my own words 9 years later that like my happiness doesn't depend on being in the Opera House Orchestra, because I am really happy here.
Yeah, it's very cool. All of that is just so great, and it's all internal. The shifts are internal. I feel like I spend a lot of time in the last couple of years anyway, just really understanding that the situation I'm in or your environment doesn't change. It's more about how you put yourself in that environment mentally, emotionally. And therapy's really important for that.
Oh my God. The world would be such a better place if everyone at least got a consultation.
Yes.
I was expecting to talk about union-y stuff today. I didn't know we were going to launch into the mental health thing.
We're getting there.
Yeah, oh. I'm really glad, though, because I feel like the more people certainly are entitled to their privacy and should stay private about the things they want to be private about. But those of us who don't mind running their mouths, every chance we have to destigmatize, my hope is that one day saying the phrase, "I see a therapist," has the same effect on everybody as "I see a chiropractor. I see a physical therapist for my sprained elbow." Oh, okay, that makes sense. That's a part of it. And I think things are better now than they were, say, 20 years ago.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, I'm glad we're talking about it.
Yeah. We talked about this with our last guest, actually. There's a lot of work in performance anxiety itself, sort of like diagnosing that problem, but where it's coming from, really getting at it as an individual. And I forget how you put it at the very beginning of this, but just yourself as a human in life, your own stuff, and how that translates to the music or the experience of auditioning. That is the part that you can really only do with a lot of deep inner work. I think everybody should do a year in their lives of this kind of work. We talk so much about taking care of our bodies, and it's important, but there's just endless things going on, limitless things going on in our brains, and it's complicated, and everybody's is unique, and there's so many different ways that the brain is functioning that we don't understand.
Well, there's so many variables too.
Yes, exactly. So when you came to DC, 2012 is when you came, is that right?
Yes.
And when did you decide to get involved in the union? Because I think that's a big part of what you do around here for advocating for musicians, right?
Yeah, for sure. I've always been interested in some sort of like a public service-y type thing, and I enjoy getting involved. So I got here in 2012. In 2014 is when our local had elections for the officers and the executive board. And our third horn player, Peter DeBoer, had been serving on the local board. And it was sort of the kind of thing where it was like people don't have time between teaching, raising families, there are all sorts of things. Meanwhile, I'm just sort of like in my 20s, like, sure. I got some time when we're not in rehearsal. So I just sort of accidentally came across this opportunity. But I like it a lot. I find it really rewarding to be a part of something that's looking out for everyone's best interests. Being a tenured member of an orchestra means that I can stick my neck out in situations and not risk the loss of, at the very least, that tenured job. And I understand that that's a privilege in our industry, that there are other people who probably are often afraid, understandably, to stick their necks out because they're like, well, yeah, this sucks. But if I speak up about this, then so-and-so is the contractor of this gig and also contracts a lot of my other gigs. So I don't want to piss them off, I don't want to say that I've done this too often, that I'm some sort of hero or something, but I'm glad to be able to use that privilege for good and not just a means to an end. Mm-hmm. I hope that didn't come across as bratty.
Not at all.
Okay.
It's very thoughtful.
All right. I've also really enjoyed the political legislative work being on this board in DC. We've attended lots of stuff on Capitol Hill. We got to meet John Lewis once.
Oh,
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It was a royalties thing. People were giving testimony at a congressional hearing, and John Lewis was on the committee that was holding the meeting. So yes, we got to meet politicians, but we also got to interact with other labor unions, everyone else involved with the AFL-CIO, which if listeners, sorry, I know it's alphabet soup. It is the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations.
Nicely done.
Well put.
I have to give a shout out to both Ed Malaga, the president of our local, and Marta Bradley, the secretary treasurer of our local. They both are so dedicated to their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And they're so passionate, they're so savvy, and they have worked so hard to get us in a place where we can have these ties with these other labor organizations.
Mm-hmm.
It takes work, and they do it 110%.
Mm-hmm.
Tirelessly. Yeah. Both of them are really intensely advocating for the musicians of this area in every way that they can think.
Mm-hmm.
I really do believe that's true. I'm curious, what is your experience when you talk with these other labor unions? Has there been anything enlightening or that you've learned when you guys have interacted with them?
Well, something that comes to mind is that organizing efforts for the musician, there's a lot that musicians have to keep doing. I feel like there are other trade unions where it's just sort of expected. You go into your workplace, things are taken care of. If there's an issue, you talk to your union steward. That infrastructure is set up and everything. Gigs are so different. A wedding gig for you string players or for us brass players compared to playing with American Pops, compared to playing with a theater orchestra downtown. There are some situations where, yes, the infrastructure is there, protocol, I should say, is there.
Mm-hmm.
But the line between what's union and what's union friendly is sometimes blurred. Sometimes it's like, well, this church is paying me $1,000 to play Easter. It's not a union gig, but what problem would the union have with this? I could list problems that could happen at that gig. But the point is, I feel like in order to make things stronger for all of us, we are tasked with being vigilant. And it's not just union for the sake of being union. It's union for the sake of proper pay, proper conditions, getting paid on time. These are things that musicians can really easily be exploited and taken advantage of. I understand that with our generation, unions don't always get the sunniest reputation, but I feel like we have the opportunity to change that.
Mm.
And if we do, rising tide raises all boats. And the more we do, the more things improve. I just look over the last 7 years that Ed and Marta have been a team at the local and how many gigs and how many new contracts have happened. I'm really proud of the work that's being done here. And it's thanks to their work, but also really it's thanks to the work of the musicians who are actually playing these jobs. Because the union isn't some agency. We're not some like law firm or something hired to do all the dirty work. The dirty work has to be done by everybody. So there's your socialist propaganda for the day.
So when I started out in the DC area, I was not a union member because none of the jobs that I played were union jobs. I played a lot of weddings. I played community orchestras. And honestly, I did not at the beginning see the benefit of joining a union. So what would you say are the greatest benefits, or when should one consider joining the union? Should it be a requirement for everyone who plays in a certain area? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my mind immediately jumps to the ideal, and that is that everything is under a union contract. Again, not for the sake of the AFM, American Federation of Musicians, having their stamp on it, but for the sake of protections and proper pay. It's so weird because it's like sometimes people want to pay more for the flowers and the music at a wedding or church gigs. This notion that the musicians are carrying out their God-given gifts, it's their passion. Why should they be paid? Is the pastor being paid? Are the custodians being paid? Is the organist being paid? You think of what we pay for a technician to come out, like a plumber, or if we were to go to a chiropractor. I don't know why I keep saying, I've never even been to a chiropractor.
They're pretty great.
I keep hearing how good they are. The reason I bring up those professions is not to tear them down and say, oh, they're ripping us off every time we go to them for service. It's, why should we be paid less than they are? Think of all the degrees that have gone into one's playing. Think of the instruments. Think of the different ways you need to maintain the instrument, the having a car and paying for gas to get to your gigs, the wardrobe, the attire that we all have to wear for a concert. And that's all on top of just existing as human beings and paying rent and paying utilities. I know I'm getting all soapboxy here, but we have just put so much love and so much time and money into it. So going back to your union-y question, I'm not dodging it. I'm not doing the work of a Washington insider, I promise. I feel like there should be some more union advocacy at the collegiate level. Because I don't know about you two, but no one came in to speak about this stuff. It was just graduated and we were just sort of expected to join this mysterious organization.
Yeah. And most of us join because we get hired for a job that requires it, and that will cover the cost of the initial membership. And then once you're in the flow and you're getting more work, then it's just a thing you do. For sure. I totally agree with that. There is no education about it on the musician side to reach at the collegiate level so they have an understanding.
Yeah.
I think that's a big deal. Yep.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. But to Stephanie's point about when you're first starting out and you're playing jobs that aren't union dues, it's not just some tax that's taken off of your paycheck.
For people who are just starting out in their careers, you're not making any money yet. You're being asked to join the union, and you're being asked to pay this fee that it's very abstract in the moment. It's like a hard pill to swallow. So I guess what I'm wondering is whether maybe there should be some kind of lower fee for people who are just starting out. I know it covers certain things. It covers administrative things, operations, a lot of these little details that we see the benefits of once we're doing union work. What if there was like an introductory rate for people who just graduated and who are getting started in an area that might be easier to swallow?
The first thing that comes to mind is there actually is a student discount.
Oh.
That I wasn't aware of when I was a student because I wasn't union savvy when I was a student.
Me either.
Yeah.
It ties back to your idea of having more advocacy at the collegiate level. If there are actual offerings for students who are learning about the importance, then you're educating these musicians from the start about the importance of various rights that we should have on every job we play, which gives you that feeling of empowerment from the ground up. It's really interesting. I have a similar like grassroots start to my career that Stephanie has, where unless you're fortunate to win a job, you are basically starting at a low rung of the gig hierarchy ladder, right? And when you're playing those jobs like a community orchestra that needs a ringer to sit in the back of the section and they're going to pay you $200, you want experience, so you're going to take it. And those jobs are not, at least not yet, directly related to the union. And some musicians end up building their careers with those types of jobs, and then they don't really see the benefit or return on investment from their membership dues. And I think Stephanie and I both are also speaking now from a place of privilege because we're in a position in our careers after the slog of climbing the ladder for however many years that we're fortunate to be getting regular work that is supported by our union, that does have a collective bargaining agreement, that we have a say to some extent, although that's a whole other, we could talk about that too, like the hierarchy within the union too, right? Of freelancers and full-time job and this and that. But that middle ground of freelance musician life and how we give those musicians a feeling of empowerment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is a good point. And it reminds me of health insurance. In my teens and early 20s, health insurance feels like something that's just throwing money into something that I never use. I'm 35 now, and I won't give a list of health reasons why I take advantage of health insurance, but there are now things like therapy that I do take advantage of health insurance for. And so it's sort of in a similar spirit. If you're just out of school and your experience is jobs that are not union, paying membership dues does go into something that will give you advocacy later on in your career and hopefully soon in your career. The ideal thing to do when you're young and you're starting out with those non-union jobs. I've turned my Easter gig into a union job.
Oh.
It doesn't take that much. You literally fill out 2 forms, and they're just boilerplate language, single page, maybe double-sided forms. You need the signature of whoever handles the finances, if it's for a church gig, whoever handles the finances at the church. One of the aspects of being a member in any local is we have an amazing team of lawyers on retainer. And so if something comes up at a union job that requires a lawyer, we have really good people. And whether or not you have a good lawyer, you have a contract in place. Let's go to that $1,000 Easter gig for a trumpet player. I've never heard of this happening. But what if the church didn't pay, never sent that $1,000 check, and there was no contract? I'm sure you could go to small claims court and maybe things would be ruled in your favor. But you'd be doing it alone without significant legal backbone.
What you just mentioned about unionizing your own gigs, that's really interesting to me. I did not even know that that was a possibility.
Me too.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting to think about this idea. And we keep mentioning the ideal. And I actually think it's important to clarify that because right now, for a lot of listeners, this idea is pretty big. But this concept that if the standard was everyone It doesn't matter what the job is. If the standard is just that when you are called for a job, you have a policy that it has a union contract. And so here's the paperwork. It's super simple. If it just became commonplace to do that, that would go a long way.
Right.
My knee-jerk reaction is when I say that to a church or contractor, they'll be like, okay, I'll find somebody else.
This actually leads into something that I've been wanting to ask. So we've talked a lot about the musician side, the roles and responsibilities for the musician, which I think are really important. And that idea of educating from the ground up would be a really great place to start. Mm-hmm. What about on the employer side? We talk about a church job or some couple that's hiring for a wedding. If the culture doesn't support the idea that we should be earning what we deserve to be earning, if they don't know any better, I mean, there's a lack of education and understanding on that side too. That's the part I'm really interested in as well, is when we set these things up, how to communicate with employers. It seems like common sense, but obviously there's that culture of not valuing what we do as a valid career. People don't understand the level of training. How many times have any of us had like a relative or a friend of a relative who's not in the music world and doesn't understand what we do when we say we're musicians for a living? I think they have this mental image of us like playing in a bar and getting paid $20. That feels overwhelming sometimes to think about. That's where that fight to pay us what we're worth comes from.
Totally. And actually, just really quick side story, Toby Oft, the person whose website that blog post was on, he has a story of he was on an airplane once and making chit chat with the person next to him. And well, what do you do for? And he said, oh, well, I don't know if he said he's principal trombonist of the Boston Symphony, but at the very least, he mentioned the Boston Symphony and maybe the Pops as well. And the person said, oh, so what is your day job?
Yeah.
Right.
To Stephanie's point of, well, if I don't do this work for this crap pay, someone else will. It's real. It exists. Making an extra couple $100, is it worth it? Easy for privileged me to say that. I understand, especially in these times, that no, every freaking penny matters. Mm. But ideally, wouldn't it be great if we all said no? And so every person that church called said no. And, oh, darn, we're going to have to pay the musicians.
I think it all goes back to, like you said, this has been said a couple times, is education of the musicians. If you can start when musicians are in school, if they know they're going to pursue music either as a freelancer, as a teacher, anybody who does music on any level professionally, that they get the education about what they're worth. That's really what it is. We have a legitimate vocation. And I think that's really what at the heart of it, because when you graduate from school, you're like, oh, well, I'm just a musician. I have to scrounge for everything anyway, because that's what society thinks of musicians.
And we're also taught never say no.
Right.
Never say no.
Right.
That's the advice. Don't say no.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Say yes to everything, build your reputation, etc. And that flies in the face of value yourself, value your time, value your ability, and you should get paid for what you can do.
Totally. That actually reminds me of last night I was listening to a couple of episodes, Kaylee Miller.
Oh, yeah.
She was talking about the way high school students are treated like workers and people who take orders. I forget how she worded it, but...
Oh, yeah.
How we're taught to be workers.
Yes.
Yep.
Right. And we're not taught to take care of ourselves. And obviously, Kaylee was talking about something much more physical. But really, the same is true in this paradigm.
It's making my head explode. Only because, yeah, this is a full body nod moment. I'm just realizing, though, like, we're talking about trained as collegiate musicians. Say yes to all the jobs, get all the work, get in the section, don't make anybody mad, be professional, da-da-da-da-da-da. But actually, it starts before that. You can't go into your competitive youth symphony orchestra program and be like, you know, we've been rehearsing this Shostakovich for like an hour and 45 minutes without a break. You've drilled this passage like 45 times. We need a break. They're not allowed to do that.
Nope.
They have to take it. They have to just take it.
Yeah, otherwise you'll get kicked out of rehearsal or failed, or you'll have some sort of wrist slap. I was actually going to say earlier, can you imagine if university students organized so that these classes were under some sort of contract?
What if they had their own orchestra committees? What if high school youth symphonies had their own orchestra committees?
I mean, it's outrageous to think about, but just like you said, it's ingrained in us from a really early age. Those of us who have gone down the conveyor belt of conventional music. Really, at what point is enough enough? And I'm not here to try to shame anybody because I do understand that I bring an amount of privilege to the table. But I hope at the end of the day, people at least consider their worth, their value. Nothing exists in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm. Which I guess is to your point, Doug, that you have said several times. It does come down to the musicians who are doing that work and what they're willing to put up with. And I'm really exploring in my mind what this looks like to allow young people to feel like they have autonomy over what's happening in their jobs. That's their understanding then about how the music world works. That they've started already. They get out into the professional world and they're less likely to take a job that doesn't pay well or treats the musicians badly or whatever it is because they've never known anything other than to have autonomy over their career, which is very interesting. It almost has to be like a multifaceted approach to try to educate as many musicians as you can. You know, how do you reach the very large, and I think it's worth acknowledging here in DC, most freelance musicians are not playing a lot of union work right now. We have a huge freelance community, massive. And if we all were able to come together and organize all this different work that we have, then it would probably be a better place to work for everyone. At the same time, how do you get them to feel like they have a seat at the table? How do you get them there? It's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's the truth. When there's no like set group.
Yeah.
There's no opportunity for an orchestra committee.
Maybe there's not a roster, but there's a regular list of people who are called to do certain jobs. And even those who are under bargaining agreements might not have an orchestra committee.
Yeah, we just formed one.
That's right. Yes.
As you know.
Yes. I wasn't in the room for that. Do you want to speak to that at all? About what that process was like?
So Liz and I both play regularly with the Maryland Lyric Opera, and it's a fairly new organization. We have been operating under a collective bargaining agreement with the union. That was just renegotiated. And we now have an orchestra committee that is comprised of regularly playing members who are in good standing with union. It was a great step because that's one of those organizations where Liz and I play and there's no core group of musicians. So it's easy to feel like you don't have a voice there. And I think this really gets at the heart of what freelancers feel in the area is that while we are required to be part of the union for many, many jobs, we do not have a voice in what goes on because we're freelancers. So it's almost like, I mean, I hate to be dramatic, but like second-class citizens. So there's people who have the jobs who are up here and they have their orchestra committee, they have their contract, they have all these things. And of course they should be part of the union. That makes sense. And then there's the rest of us who play many different places, but don't feel like they have the same say or even the same benefits, although I know that that's not true. But it's just a different feeling.
And to circle this back, Doug, you said this at the very beginning. It is rooted in that fear that we don't want to lose the jobs. So people don't feel comfortable voicing their opinions or making waves. And I brought this up it was really very well done. And Marta was great. It was a Zoom meeting and whoever wanted to join could join. But we only had, I don't know what, maybe 30% of the musicians in the group or who have played in the group. And I did speak up and say, I think the more transparent you can be about what's going on here in writing to directly speak to those of us who are not regularly rostered musicians, the better, because otherwise there is that disconnect. I'm sure that there were several other colleagues of ours who are in the similar place we are on that call list that would have been like, oh, that's not for me. That meeting is intended for the people who sit in the top 4 seats who are always going to get called. And, you know, I'm just a sub. So that education piece. Yeah. Yeah.
I understand that feeling of second-class citizenship exists. We were talking about audition prep and progress, not perfection. And even if we never in our lifetimes see the perfect ideal music industry, the more we can do for progress, the closer we can move ourselves towards that, the better for everybody. There's been a lot of really good work at the grassroots level. And again, one of the misconceptions about a union is that it's some sort of agency that makes this thing happen. The union is a collective.
Yeah, I think that's so great. And I just think coming out of the last 18 months of our lives that we have an opportunity we could try to seize. A lot of freelancers are sort of reevaluating the way their career works. They're valuing their time, their efforts. They're valuing things more equally to the paycheck than maybe we would have several years ago. And so I think there's an opportunity here. You have a voice in this too. But I really appreciate, Doug, that you bring it back to this idea that, like, yes, we've talked a lot about the ideal today, and we have to have perspective here about what this is going to look like. And it's not going to be overnight, everybody's agreeing to do this and it's working perfectly. It's got to be an inch of progress at a time, just one little step forward.
I think that's so important. And that's so important for the union, is that we're not expecting things to change overnight. Just that little bit of progress. That's what really spoke to me, is that, okay, we can do this over time. Mm-hmm. It doesn't all have to be at once. And that's what feels so overwhelming. I think people feel like it's black and white. Mm-hmm. It's right or it's wrong. You're union or you're not. That's a really important point, to be like, this is a process and we're making progress.
Totally. If there's a listener who is a member of DCFM who wants to know how to get involved with things that are currently being worked on, my email address is trombonedug@gmail.com. I'd be happy to get you in touch with the people who are spearheading the organizing efforts, because there is work on this front right in front of us right now.
That's great. And if anybody's listening and they're curious about the union, they can go to afm.org and they can find what their local is and who the people are to contact or email if they have questions about union activity in their area.
And one PSA I want to make. I hope everyone who's listening who is a member of DCFM knows this. There's something called We Care, and it's a fund through the local if you are falling on hard times. It's a pretty broad fund that you can apply for a grant, especially right now with everything that's going on. I hope people who could use the help do so. All you have to do is contact the local. And if you're in a position to do so and you want to help your fellow union member, We Care always takes donations.
That's great.
It's all great.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much, Doug. This has been really great conversation.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this.
Good.
Oh, good.
And I really enjoyed chatting with both of you.
Yes.
Yes, always, always.
Thank you so much for listening today. And thanks also to our Season 2 sponsor, Arkrest.
Another thanks to Alto Clef Gifts, where you can purchase viola-centric shirts and mugs and a variety of other fun items featuring our beloved alto clef.
You can support our future episodes by supporting our sponsors through our PayPal link or Venmo, and by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. And please consider sharing your favorite episodes with your music-loving friends.
Our episodes are produced by Liz O'Hara-Starr.
The viola-centric theme music was written and produced by JP Wogerman and is performed by Steph and myself.
Thanks again for listening. Let's talk soon.